Welcome back to the GCN Racing News Show. This week, after a stunning victory at the British National Championships, Mark Cavendish should get a place at the Quick-Step Alpha Vinyl team for the Tour de France. But he probably won't, and I'll be telling you the reason why. I'll also be wrapping up a weekend full of National Championship races and letting you know which National Champs jerseys we'll be seeing at the Tour de France next month. So let's start then with the British Men's National Road Champs. Held in Dumfries in Scotland under fairly typical midsummer Scottish weather, i.e. blooming atrocious. Now, it's an event where the winning move can go at any moment. There's very little control, so everybody needs to be vigilant from the start. And that's certainly a good way to describe Mark Cavendish on the day. From the opening few kilometres of the race, he was constantly on the offensive and at the front. Now, it's not something that we normally see from him. His role as a sprinter means that he normally needs to hide as much as he possibly can until the final few hundred metres. But when he does get the opportunity to just go out and race, he not only clearly loves it, he's also bloody good at it. So 10 kilometres into the 200-kilometre race, he'd already joined Nicholas Cooper and Damien Clayton at the head of the race, with John Archibald and Ethan Hayter later bridging across. Then about 40 k's later, a group containing the likes of Ben Turner and Jake Stewart bridged across, and the group grew further still when Owain Doull, Connor Swift and others also got themselves to the front of the race. Now, the attacks then seemed to never stop for the entire 200 kilometres, but Cavendish was always in the thick of the action. Ben Turner put in a big move in the latter stages of the race, only to be caught and dropped by 3 riders: Cavendish, Alex Richardson of Le Col and Sam Watson of the Groupama development team. Each of them tried to go clear in the end, but in the end it all came down to a 3-up sprint, and I guess there was only really going to be one result at that point. Cavendish took the sprint and his second national title 9 years after the first, which also came in Scotland. And it was a reminder that when Cavendish is freed from sprinter duties, he's just a blooming good bike racer. It was a ride and a result that renewed the calls for Cavendish to be included in Quick-Step Alpha Vinyl's Tour de France lineup. And you can see why. Cavendish is clearly in great form. He has the chance to make history and create a storyline that fans and journalists would love to see played out. So why wouldn't they take him? Well, the answer is Fabio Jakobsen. The Dutchman has been the most consistent and successful sprinter of the season so far, with 10 wins already, and he's been waiting for an opportunity to compete at the biggest race in the world for quite a few years now. On to the other national championships now, and which national jerseys we're likely to see racing at the Tour de France in July. Well, it's unlikely that we'll see the British road champions in the men's race. We've already talked about Mark Cavendish, of course. In the women's road race, Alice Towers of Le Col Wahoo caused a really big upset. The 19-year-old had been part of an elite front group of riders that also included the likes of Pfeiffer Georgie and Anna Henderson, but Towers made her move with almost 40 kilometres still remaining. She quickly carved out a large advantage and was never seen again. And not only is that the biggest victory of her career, it's also the first victory of her career in a road race. Not a bad place to achieve that. She'll wear the colours of national champion for the next 12 months. Now, her team, Le Col Wahoo, will be racing the Tour de France Femme avec Zwift later on in July, and they will now have to make the decision as to whether or not to put such a young rider in their lineup. Towers has been racing on the international scene all year, though, so hopefully we will see her in July as part of that team. Now, there are a couple of notable national champions who will not be at the Tour de France in July. Tim Merlier won the Belgian national title in Middelkerke, outsprinting a group of around 25 riders. Jordi Meijers of Bora Hansgrohe finished a close second, with Merlier's Alpecin Fenix teammate Jasper Philipsen in third. Now, Philipsen will be at the Tour de France, but Merlier wasn't selected this year, news that was revealed a few weeks ago. After that race, team manager Christoph Rodoff confirmed that Merlier is off to Quick-Step Alpha Vinyl next season, and that team really could have done with him yesterday because they failed to get a single rider into the top 20. In Eritrea, Mawari Kudus of EF Education Easy Post won the men's road race ahead of Nathanael Tesfatsion. Kudus almost certainly won't be racing the Tour de France, having not long completed the Giro d'Italia, and neither will Biniam Girmay, who won the time trial earlier on in the week. Now, many of us were speculating about a possible participation for him at the Tour after he had to leave the Giro d'Italia prematurely, but his team said that they would stick with their original plan with some big goals later on in the season. A shame, for sure, but we will surely see him make his debut at the Tour de France next year. Girmay mania, though, is continuing in Eritrea. These were the scenes after he won that time trial last Friday. I just love seeing the passion around Binyam Girmay. Thanks incidentally to African Vision Sport and Education for allowing us to use that video. Now, the Italian national jersey will also be absent from the Tour de France because in the women's race, Elisa Balsamo took the win after outsprinting Barbieri and Guarischi. But as she's also world champion, she won't be wearing the national championships jersey until at least September. In the men's, Filippo Zanna took the biggest win of his career, but his team, Bardiani, are not riding the Tour. In France, Florian Sénéchal took his first national elite title, pipping Anthony Turgis to the post. It was a brilliant race, I've got to say, and you can catch it on demand on GCN Plus if you missed it. It must have been slightly embarrassing for the French teams, though, who all fielded about 80 riders each, whilst Quick-Step only had 3 on the start line. What was great to see also was Julian Alaphilippe returning to racing and finishing in the second group in 13th place. It's been a really long road to recovery for Alaphilippe after that horrific crash at Liège-Bastogne-Liège towards the end of April, but it looks now like things are getting back on track. However, I just looked at some reports this morning which have suggested that Alaphilippe will not be at the Tour de France for Quick-Step this season. Meanwhile, Audrey Cordon-Ragot did the double, winning both the time trial and the road race. It will be her who has the privilege of racing in the Bleu, Blanc et Rouge at the Tour de France Femmes. In Spain, Mavi Garcia also doubled up, winning the time trial by almost a minute and the road race by more than 3. She was basically in a class of her own. Raul Garcia of Equipe Kern Pharma caused a bit of an upset by winning the men's time trial in Spain, whilst Carlos Rodriguez, who was 4th that day, soloed to victory in the road race. That is the second win of his career, the first being a stage at the Tour of the Basque Country in April. And at 21, that lad, you've got to say, has got a very, very bright future in front of him. 2 further riders who are likely to be at the Tour de France in their national colours are Niels Pollitt, who won solo in Germany, and Peter Sagan, who won his 8th elite title in Slovakia. And it's now been 12 years since somebody not called Sagan won that race. In Austria, there was a 1-2-3-4-5 for Bora Hansgrohe, of Felix Großschartner crossing the line first, just a few days after winning the time trial there too. João Almeida won the road race in Portugal, Alexander Kamp in Denmark, Pascal Eenkorn in the Netherlands, and Carl Murphy in the US. Emil Leupins became the new Latvian champion, despite only finishing the race in 8th place. Reason being, there was a combined Baltic Championships where the Latvian, Estonian and Lithuanian champions were all crowned. First across the line was Venantas Lasinis of Lithuania, with Mikkel Reim taking the Estonian title by finishing 2nd. On the women's side, Cecilie Uttrup Ludwig took her first national elite title in Denmark. Liane Lippert, her 2nd title in Germany 4 years after the last. Rianne Marcus won in the Netherlands, Emma Langley in the US, and Christine Mahrus did the double again in Luxembourg. So she has now won the road race championships there 13 years in a row, and the time trial title 16 years in a row. That is utterly bonkers. Fair play to her. One other notable win came in Canada, where Paula Findlay won the time trial. So Findlay is a 5-time ITU world champion, and at the age of 33 won the time trial title at her first attempt. Now, National Champs Weekend always poses a bit of a problem, whereby it's very difficult to keep abreast of all the stories from every race. So I apologise if I've missed anything particularly significant and that I haven't mentioned all of them. Now, I probably don't need to tell you what's coming up on GCN Plus this week, but I'm going to anyway. So on Friday at 14:30 BST, we will be live with the breakaway ahead of Stage 1 of the Tour de France in Copenhagen, Denmark. I honestly cannot wait. It's going to be a fantastic race. I can feel it in my bones. Now, our live and on-demand coverage will be available to you if you're in Europe or the Asia Pacific, excluding China, Japan, New Zealand and Australia. So there are more territory restrictions than we had for the Giro d'Italia, but I hope you'll join us for it if you can. Now, if you haven't already watched our Tour de France preview show, that is out now on our channels, with a look at all of the stages and the main favourites taking part. We will also have a whole host of Tour de France related content that will be free to read on the app, and there'll be something for everybody there, whether you're just getting into the sport or you've been a die-hard fan for decades. We also have another show coming up tomorrow, looking back at how we've got to this point of the season, plus interviews with Tour de France race directors Christian Prudhomme and Marianne Rousse. For that, we actually partnered up with the Tour de France, and we've also worked with them on a new clothing line that includes this hoodie and a couple of t-shirts, one of which you can see hanging on the wall behind me. Now, we mentioned in our preview show that they are limited edition, and we've already sold over half the stock. So if you like the look of these bits of clothing, you'd better get in quick. You just need to head head to shop.globalcyclingnetwork.com, where you will also find another collection of t-shirts and sweatshirts celebrating the biggest race on earth, as well as a special yellow Elite water bottle. We've also got a couple of bundle offers on at the moment. So, for example, if you buy the bottle and our complete Fan's Guide to Pro Cycling book, you'll get 10% off. We'll have a link to the shop in the description just down below. Outside of the Tour de France, we've got a lot of women's racing for you this week. So the 3-day Lotto Belgium Tour starts tomorrow with a prologue and concludes on Thursday, which is also when the Giro Donne begins, also with a prologue. The 10-day race has for a long time been the most prestigious stage race in women's cycling, and we will see a large number of the sport's biggest stars compete there, despite the inaugural Tour de France Femmes avec Zwift starting just a couple of weeks after the Giro Donne finishes. Now, amongst those doing both will be Annemiek van Vleuten, who skipped the Dutch National Championships for the first time in over a decade in order to concentrate on her goal of winning both the Giro and the Tour. And who would bet against her? If anyone can do that, she can. Elisa Balsamo, Demi Vollering, Marta Cavalli, Cecily Uttrup Ludwig and Ashley Moolman-Pasio are amongst the other big names who will be racing both. Now, we will be showing both of those races in all GCN Plus territories, where you can find live and on-demand coverage. So if you're not already a subscriber, what are you waiting for? We would love for you to join the fun. Meanwhile, the world of cycling this week will focus mainly on the upcoming Tour de France, and that will be out for you to watch on GCN Plus this Wednesday. In other news, the transfer rumour mill is, well, it's not quite in full swing just yet, but it's getting there. Now, I've already mentioned that confirmation that Tim Merlier is headed away from Alpecin-Fenech, soon to be known as Alpecin-de Koning, but they are rumoured to be signing 3 riders for 2023. Quinten Hermans from Intermarché, Caden Groves from Team Bike Exchange, and Søren Kragh Andersen from Team DSM. Now, the Dane was not selected for the Tour de France this year, which must be an even bigger disappointment as it starts in Denmark. And you've got to assume that the sole reason for his non-selection is because he is leaving Team DSM at the end of the season. Eurosport and Discovery Plus will not only be showing live coverage of the Giro Donne starting on Thursday, they are also sponsoring 2 of the leaders' jerseys, the Best Young Rider and the Queen of the Mountains, which is great to see. The Puy de Dôme looks like it could make a comeback at the Tour de France in a not-too-distant future. Christian Prudhomme was there last week with the local dignitaries, with an eye on featuring the climb in the 2024 edition of the race. Now, it's been the scene of some of the most famous and historical moments in the sport's history, including the battle between Raymond Poulidor and Jacques Anquetil in 1964, and Eddy Merckx getting punched by a spectator in 1975. However, it's not been used at the Tour de France since 1988, largely because of the lack of room at the top to host the biggest race in the world. Prudhomme clearly thinks they can make it work, though, and it would be absolutely brilliant to see the modern-day peloton racing up such an iconic climb. And finally, sticking with the Tour de France, their partnership with the Quebecer charity has been extended to include the Tour de France Femmes avec Zwift. So over the last few years, that partnership has led to the donation of over 500 bikes to children that are most in need of transport in Africa. So it's great to see that partnership extended. Right, that is all for this week's Racing News Show. I'm off to have a lie down before things get a little bit hectic later on this week. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I hope to see you on Friday.